brothers and sisters. As always, I appreciate you being with me this afternoon, and I am happy to be here. I trust that by God's grace we have had a good week, and that we have been able to discern His blessing in everything, in every aspect of our lives. Thanks again for being with me this afternoon. Let's start with prayer as always, as we bow our heads. Father, thank you for once again giving us the privilege of meeting together this afternoon. We commit ourselves into your hand, and as always we look to you and pray that you will provide us with the right information, the right thoughts, the right perspective as we share together in the study of your word. Thank you for hearing me and for answering our prayer now and always. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so, yeah, as Brother Mike said, you're all on time. Thank you for being on time. Thank you for being here. All right, so we have been going through 1 Corinthians little by little, not going at a very fast pace at all, and we are actually now at chapter 10, and we're halfway through chapter 10. As I pointed out last week, there are quite a number of different topics that are covered in this first letter to the Corinthians, and it seems apparent that what is contained in this letter is Paul's answer to some questions, Paul's answers to some questions that were sent to him by these brethren. They wanted to know about getting married, they wanted to know about food offered to idols, and they had the issue about, different people following different apostles, and similar questions. And so you find that in this book there are quite a number of different topics that are covered. So we're going to continue with our study of chapter 10 this week, and I think to some extent what we will find is that chapter 10 kind of it looks again, there's a further examination of a particular topic that we already touched on in this book. So let me bring up the Bible. Right, now in last week's study we looked at what Paul said about the history of the Israelites being an example to those of us who live in the last days, and he said that the things that happened to them, they were examples and they were warnings to us that we should not follow the same pattern of apostasy that they went through. As he said, they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. And so in light of this situation, in light of the failures of these people in the time of Moses, Paul says, therefore, in light of this, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. In other words, we should not become arrogant or self-confident and feel that we are infallible. We are Christians, yes, but many of them, he points to the fact that these people also had great revelations from God. And they fell into all these different sins. They failed God in so many ways. And so Paul is saying, it happened to people that God spoke to personally, and so therefore, you be careful, because the same thing can happen to you. And I think as we continue in the chapter, we will see that he has something particular in mind. So in verse 13, I did not touch on this verse last week because it's such a precious verse. There's such a beautiful promise here that I wanted to make sure that we examined it carefully. This is one of the verses that I really loved in my early years as a Christian. Especially at that time, it meant a lot to me. At that time, I was fixated. I was focused on the task of overcoming sin, and I was persuaded that overcoming sin meant facing temptation one by one, and trying to defeat each temptation as it comes along. My understanding of how to overcome sin has changed somewhat, but the promise remains just as precious. Um, the verse says, "There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will, with the temptation, also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it." There are so many beautiful facets to what is said in this verse. First of all, Paul starts by saying that there's nothing that can face you. There's nothing that comes upon you that is extraordinary or unusual. In other words, what you face, the temptation you face, is something others have faced before you. It's a common part of human experience, and I guess I can agree with that. When I look back at the things that have been obstacles to me as a Christian, the things that have been temptations, there's nothing that is unique. If I'm tempted to steal, others have been tempted. If I'm tempted to commit fornication or adultery, others have been tempted. If I'm tempted to lie, others have been tempted. If I've been tempted to put myself before others, others have been tempted. Every single thing that comes upon me has been faced by other people. And I think Paul mentions this because he wants us to get away from the thinking that I am at such a disadvantage because I have such a strong temptation, or I am not able to overcome this temptation because it is just something superhuman. I just can't. What he's trying to do is focus our attention on something I always believe in. One of the things that gives me assurance over and over, and I often repeat this even when I'm talking to the Lord, and it is this: I am a Christian. I can do anything. I am a Christian. I can do anything. I belong to the Lord. Nothing can defeat me. I say these words to myself many times because it is absolutely true. How can you be a son of God? How can you have Jesus Christ living in you and be overcome by any temptation at all? How can anything in this world be too strong for you? And it makes me understand that many times we fail because we don't recognize, first of all, who we are in Christ, and we fail to focus on the reality of who lives in us. Nobody can sin in the presence of God or in the presence of Jesus. No Christian can sin in their presence. But first of all, even in our minds, we have to remove them from our presence. We have to remove their presence from us. I mean, God is not really absent. Jesus is not really absent if you're a Christian, but you can remove them from your presence by choosing that your mind should dwell on something else. But anyway, so Paul starts by giving this assurance that anything you can face, other people have faced it before. And if other people have been able to overcome these temptations, what about you who are a Christian? You are superior to anybody in this world in terms of the advantages you have. Nothing can defeat you. So he's trying to emphasize this advantage, this assurance we have. Second point, but God is faithful. God is faithful. What does that mean? Well, when we say somebody is faithful, it means that the person can be depended upon to do something. One of the goals we have as Christians is to develop a reputation for being faithful. When I give my word, it is like a band of iron. When I commit myself to doing something, people don't have to ask twice. It will be done. I remember a story my mother read to me when I was a little boy, when she used to read bedtime stories, but it was about a boy named Peter. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but the lesson is a good one. It's about a boy named Peter who, he went to seek a job. Probably he was on hard times. Maybe his parents were dead or what, I don't know, but he went to look for a job. And he went to a farm, and, the farmer liked the look of this lad, but he needed somebody who was dependable. And he started to ask him questions, what can you do? And, how can I know that you are somebody who will do as you're told? And to most of his questions, this boy Peter simply kept answering, I can sleep on windy nights. I can sleep on windy nights. Which the farmer thought was a bit strange, and he was tempted to turn him away because of this. But then he liked the look of this boy, and he saw that the boy was in need of help, so he eventually hired him. He was satisfied. He was very pleased with what he got, because Peter turned out to be a hardworking, conscientious boy. And so things went on well for a while. And then one night, the farmer awoke to recognize that they were in the middle of a storm. And he thought, the chickens need to be taken up. The doors for the pens need to be closed. The barn and so on, everything is open. And this storm is going to do a lot of damage. So he went to call Peter. Peter, Peter. There was no sound. He banged on the door. Peter, Peter. No sound. No matter what he did, there was no answer. And he started to get more and more furious, till eventually he ran out into the storm alone, promising himself that in the morning he would get rid of Peter, because he needed somebody he could call upon in emergencies. He ran outside and ran down to where the animals were kept, and he stopped in amazement. Everything was in place. Everything was closed up, tight, sealed. All the animals were safe. The doors were closed, and everything was securely buttoned down. As he stood there in amazement, the words came back to his mind. The words of Peter, I can sleep on windy nights. And suddenly he understood. He understood what Peter meant when he made that statement. He was so dependable that when emergencies came, he didn't need to move, because he would have made all preparations for those emergencies. The story, it's a story. It taught me something even as a boy, that whatever you're doing, when you undertake to do something, do it well. And I think that by God's grace, that has kind of followed me during my lifetime. Many times I don't do things that I should do, but when I undertake to do something, I try to do it the best way that I can. And this is kind of what it means to be faithful. Faithfulness is a word that emphasizes the fact that a person can be depended on. Faithfulness means that in all situations, in all circumstances, I can put my confidence in this person. Now, the Bible asks us to be faithful so that God can put confidence in us. God can say, I can put you before a court. I can put you in trying situations. I can put you through fire or water, and I know you will represent me the right way. You're faithful. But the Bible also says that God is faithful, which means that I can depend on God. I can trust God to do what he promises to do. God is the most faithful being in the universe, and this is what Paul is emphasizing. God is faithful. In what way is he faithful? He will not allow you to be tempted above what you are able. All right, so as a Christian, you know this. Nobody should say, I couldn't help myself. No Christian should say this. I mean, if you mean it literally, I couldn't help myself, fine. But that's not an excuse, because you can't help yourself, but God can help you. So, God will not allow any temptation to come that you cannot bear. When we think about the coming persecution, I've heard people say things like, boy, I don't know if I can face what is coming. I don't know if I can do this. And I've always thought, well, at least for many years, since I came to understand something, I've always thought that is such an unnecessary statement. You don't need to know whether you can face persecution. You don't need to know whether you are strong enough to be tortured and be faithful to Christ. There is a promise that God made to Israel that holds true for you and me. God said to Israel, as your days, so shall your strength be. And I remember reading a comment. I'm not sure, it might have been John Wesley who made a comment. Somebody asked, do you have dying faith? You know, they had strange terminology back in those days. Do you have dying faith, Mr. Wesley? I think it was John Wesley. And Wesley said something to the effect, I don't know if I have dying faith, but when the time comes to die, I know I will have it. And that is an expression of the way God treats us. God does not give you today what you need tomorrow. God says, as your days, so shall your strength be. Paul puts it another way, or Jesus puts it another way. He says, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. So he says, don't take any thought for tomorrow, saying, what shall you eat? What shall you drink? What shall you wear? That's tomorrow's problem. Let the problem of tomorrow be dealt with tomorrow. Don't deal with it today. Otherwise, you will kill yourself with stress. Give yourself a heart attack over something that has not even arrived. But when tomorrow comes, then God takes care of tomorrow's problems. And so your strength will be enough tomorrow to face the crisis tomorrow. You know, you have heard of people who have suffered greatly. And you wonder sometimes. I've heard of people being stabbed or shot, and they said they didn't feel anything. They didn't feel anything. Maybe afterwards they felt something, but they didn't feel anything. I've heard of people in great danger, and they say they felt no fear. The most fearful, frightening situations. But when the moment comes, God gives you something extra. So the point is that the only thing we need to do is maintain our relationship with the Lord and leave Him to take care of these other matters. So the promise is there that the faithful God will never allow you to face a temptation or to face a trial that He does not give you the grace to go through. So as Christians, we can be at peace because we know tomorrow is taken care of. We know when the problem comes, it's already dealt with, not something we should worry about. Second, as far as temptation is concerned, he says, but He will, along with the temptation, when God allows the temptation, He will also make a way to escape that temptation, that you may be able to bear it. So the point here is that, first of all, you cannot face something as a Christian unless God allows it. That's the first point. You remember the verse in Romans 8 that says, we know that all things work together for good to them that love God. And why is this? Because anything that happens to you, God measures it first. Our Father measures it, and He makes sure it's something we can bear. And when he understands this is for our good, and he provides the strength to bear it, then He allows it to come. The real problem we have is our worry and our stress and our fear. These are the killers, not the problem itself, because every problem has already been solved by the Lord. And you know, if we maintain that focus on the Lord, and we maintain that connection with Him, then the temptation is already dealt with. Even when temptation comes, it's already dealt with, even before we encounter it because we have been given all that we need to be. So, it's getting a bit warm, so turning on my fan. So Paul says, all of this he says because he's getting to this point. Wherefore, or therefore, or in light of this, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry. He's saying, when you are tempted to do things that might get you involved in idolatry, remember God has made a way for you to escape it. Now, you might ask, as a Christian, how can I get myself involved in idolatry? Well, you know, the thing about idolatry is that it's not, especially for people like us, it's not usually straightforward and directly to the point. Not usually. When Satan tries to get Christians to stumble, he often does not approach them directly because he knows that that is the surest way to fail. Christians get their defenses up. They become aroused when you try to force them to betray the Lord. But sometimes when you try subterfuge, when you try cunning and trickery, sometimes you have more success. And so, where idolatry is concerned, none of us would ever bow to an idol. But sometimes we do things that we don't agree with. It's a kind of idolatry. Why? Because we don't want to hurt other people. You know, like I've told the story of the time when I had the conviction that I should kneel. And I was in this church and they said, I was up on the pulpit. I had just preached and they said, let us remain standing for prayer. And I was convicted I should kneel. But because I didn't want to offend the people, I remained standing. This is a kind of idolatry. It's in these ways that we face a temptation. And we fall to the temptation. Because it's not direct or barefaced. If somebody had come to me directly and said, you will have to stand for prayer today, I would have knelt. But because we were all in such harmony and I had just preached a sermon and everybody was so pleased with me, I didn't want to offend them. So I chose to bend my principles, which I thought at the time was God's principle. I chose to bend my principles and to wound my conscience in order to fit in with the crowd. And in this, I was victim to a kind of idolatry. And you will notice that what Paul is about to speak about here is kind of similar, not the same thing at all, but it falls into the same kind of situation, the same kind of category. So Paul says, I'm telling you, any temptation that you face, God has made a way for you to escape it. And so, in light of this, you are to flee idolatry. So you can tell that he's looking at a situation where you might be tempted in such a way that it comes upon you, creeps upon you, and you are tempted to compromise. But Paul is letting you know, don't be tempted to do this because God already made a way for you to escape that temptation. Stand up and be strong. Trust the Lord and do what is right. Because God already provided you the strength to do this. This is what he's saying. So he says, look here, I speak as to wise men. Judge ye what I say. The NIV puts it this way. I'm speaking to sensible people. I'm speaking to intelligent people. So you can judge for yourselves what I'm about to say to you. All right, he's not flattering the people, but he's saying, look here, you're sensible people. So what I'm about to say to you now, you can think about it and you can form your own opinion. And usually, this is true. You are going to use an example or an illustration, but because the people you are talking to are intelligent enough to understand your illustration, you have confidence that you can share this with them and you can get a sensible response. Now, the point he's about to make, or the example he's about to use, he says, okay, I'm speaking to sensible people. All right, consider what I'm about to say. The cup of blessing which we bless, he's referring to the communion cup. Is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? Now, it's today when we have the communion, at least in the culture, in the religious culture in which I grew up, what we had was little glasses in which the wine was poured, grape juice, in fact. Most of the time it came from one bottle, but not always. And there was usually one piece of communion bread that was baked, and then it was broken into smaller pieces before we actually partook of it. So I guess in a sense we had one cup and one bread. But of course in Bible times it was a little different because they all drank from the same cup. And I've actually had that experience. One place I went to in Europe, probably two places, we drank from the same cup. And of course, you know, they had one loaf of bread and they broke off pieces of it, a good sized piece where everybody could have something substantial to eat. And I've also had this experience, and yeah, it was kind of nice. I kind of enjoyed it. You know, instead of just having this little bit of biscuit and just a little tiny sip in a glass. But anyway, Paul is making the point that the cup, it is one cup, and the bread is one bread, because he's focusing on the fact of the oneness. He's saying if you eat the same bread and I eat the same bread, in a way it makes us a part of the same bread. Now, what exactly is he speaking about? In verse 17, for we being many are one bread and one body, for we are all partakers of that one bread. Notice what he says in the previous verse. The cup of blessing, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? So he's saying we're all drinking one blood. Remember, blood represents the life, and the bread represents the flesh or the body of Christ. And it's like Paul is looking at it as more than just a symbol. When we partake of the cup and we eat the bread, we are actually participating in a faith service. And in this faith service, we actually receive Christ. We are actually partaking of Christ. We are actually feeding on Christ. And if it's just a ritual, then it's just a ceremonial, just like the Old Testament ceremonies. I don't think it's just a ceremonial. It was never intended to be. It was intended to be a point of contact where your faith could be exercised in receiving more of Jesus Christ. The communion was never intended to be simply a ritualistic ceremony. It was a service where Jesus in his spirit literally draws nearer and becomes more deeply embedded in the life of his people. I'm not saying that the bread is his flesh like the Catholics say. I'm not saying that the wine is his blood. But I'm saying they become a point of contact, something you can focus your faith. You focus your faith through these emblems in partaking of the real thing. This is what the communion is about. So Paul is saying when you drink of this cup, it's one body, it's one blood that you all take part of. And when you eat the bread, it's one flesh, one body that you all take part of. So in other words, you eat the bread and I eat the bread. You have a part of Christ in you and I have a part of Christ in me. You drink the wine and I drink the wine. You have the blood or the life of Christ in you and I have the life of Christ in me. So because I have the life of Christ and you have the life of Christ, we become a part of the same body. You are a part of his body. I'm a part of his body. We're a part of the same body. We become one with Jesus Christ, and in this way we also become one with each other. This is the point he's making. He goes on to speak of Israel and to show you something that the Israelites did that kind of highlights this point. He says, behold Israel after the flesh. Look at Israel, the physical Israelites. Are not they which eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? So, you know, the priests were always permitted They were mandated, they were commanded to eat of the sacrifices. There were certain parts of the sacrifices that were to be taken, and the priests were to have those parts. So what he's saying is, they eat the sacrifices, and by eating the sacrifices, they become partakers of the altar. Whatever is involved in the service of the altar, whatever that sacrifice on the altar represents, the priests took a part of it. And so in taking this part of the sacrifice, they became a part of the sacrifice. Now we know that the sacrifice represented Jesus. And so the reality, we are the true priests. We have been made a royal priesthood. So it's similar to what the priests were doing. Paul is drawing this parallel. So why is he making this point? Why is he emphasizing this? Because now he goes to verse 19. What say I then? What am I saying then? That the idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything? All right, he's going back to this subject that we looked at a couple of chapters ago. It's still in his mind, and he's still dealing with the answer to that question. So he says, what am I saying? Think about what I'm saying. When I tell you not to eat food sacrificed to idols, I'm not saying that the idol is anything. I'm not saying the idol is real, or that he has any power, or that he can affect you in any way. And I'm not saying that the food that is sacrificed to idols is anything, that there's anything different about the food, or it is poisonous, or it can destroy your Christianity. Paul didn't believe this, and I don't believe it either. One of the things that I sometimes get a little bit uncomfortable about is people who become overly fixated on what they call symbols. All right, there are people who believe that if you have a little figurine in your house, it can create some affinity to demons, or it can have some supernatural effect on you. There are people who believe in things like this, and it's kind of it's what we refer to as superstition. I don't believe that we should support idolatry or things like this in any way, but at the same time, I don't think we need to be afraid of a little stone because, for example, somebody said this stone came from a graveyard or things like that. Some people are just superstitious. If you see, there are little customs and habits that people get afraid of, and they say this is associated with this, and they're afraid of it. No, that is what Paul is saying. I'm not saying that the idol is anything; it's nothing. And I'm not saying that because this food has had some kind of contact with an idol, it is anything. That is what he's saying. He doesn't believe in superstition, like I don't believe in superstition. But here's the point. Even though I don't believe in superstition, and Paul doesn't believe in these things either, but he says, listen, but I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with devils. So even though you know that the idol or the little figurine or the little emblem or whatever is nothing, but at the same time, there are people who associate these things with devils. I would not keep a statue of Buddha in my house. Absolutely not. I know Buddha is nothing. I would not keep a statue of Krishna or any of these, or Hare Krishna, or any of these false gods which are nothing. I wouldn't keep it in my house. And I know that these are nothing. But what? I know that they have been dedicated to the worship of these idols. What am I doing with it? To promote idolatry? What am I doing? To make people think that I have some kind of affinity or some kind of attraction to these enemies of Christ, to these false gods? Absolutely not. And that is what Paul is saying. A figurine is made out of stone or wood or marble or something. It's nothing. It's just made up of chemicals and physical particles. But it is what is associated with it in the minds of people. And because of this, I don't want people to think I have anything to do with these things. So my reputation means something to me, my reputation as a Christian. So that's what Paul is saying. I don't want you to have fellowship with devils. If you have something associated with devils in your possession, or you link yourself to it in some way, in this way, you are making a statement about your about some kind of association with devils. That's what he's saying. So, in verse 21, he says, you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of the table of devils. So, remember earlier on he said something. He said that if something is offered to you and nobody says anything, if you go to the house of a heathen person, a non-Christian, and the person offers you some food, eat it and don't ask any questions, because the food is nothing. But if somebody says, did you know that was offered to Krishna or Brahma or Vishnu or Buddha or something like that, immediately leave it alone. Don't partake of it. Because now that you know, you understand that people are looking at you as a kind of witness, and they are saying, it's like I was in America, and sometimes it's not good. I was trying to do without my glasses, and I went into those little stores where they sell second-hand clothes. What do you call it? I forget the name of these little stores, but I went into one of these stores and I saw they had some second-hand ties, and I saw a nice little blue one, and I bought it. It was very cheap. I bought the tie, and then on that Sabbath when I went to the meeting, I was a speaker at the meeting, and I put on the tie, nice little blue tie, and afterwards I was meeting all the people, and a little girl or a little boy came up to me, a little girl, and said, "Ha, Brother David, it's Santa Claus." I thought, what a strange thing for this child to say. And then I noticed the other people were smiling, and the little girl said, "Yes, Brother David is Santa Claus." And she was pointing at my tie, so I took up I lifted the tie, and I looked at it, and down at the end of the tie, there was indeed an embroidered image of Santa Claus on my tie. And I had no idea. I bought this tie, and like I said, I wasn't wearing my glasses, and I just saw the pattern, and I didn't see the details. So the thing is that, of course, you know that I have never again in my life worn that tie. In fact, I got rid of it. I don't know what happened. I threw it away because I don't want a tie with Santa Claus, because I am not going to perpetuate lies and false ideas and what have you. So anyway, what I'm saying is, this is kind of like what happened, what Paul is talking about. Paul says, all right, you don't know, that's fine. But when somebody says to you, this is the fact, then don't partake anymore. Because I absolutely did not want that child or the people around me to think that I had any kind of affinity to Santa Claus. I was promoting that stupidness in any way at all, especially a little child. So of course I got rid of it immediately. So that is what Paul is saying. If you are doing something, you know that Santa Claus is nothing. You know no such creature exists. You know nobody climbs down the chimney and all that foolishness. But somebody says, this is associated with him. Get rid of it. That's what Paul is saying. All right? And it seems to me that the Corinthians were actually practicing these kinds of things, because they say, we know that there is nothing in this idol, so we can eat whatever we want. But Paul says, do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? He's saying, why are you doing these things? To try to create an offense, to try to offend the Lord. Why are you doing these things to try to offend the Lord? In other words, if I may put it in my words, I would say, why don't you rather take the safe course? Why don't you take the safe course? long ago, many years ago, when I was a young Christian, that thought occurred to me. Why don't we take the safe course? I was constantly meeting young people my age back in those days, and because I was a young Christian, I was kind of pushy. But one of the things that people would say to me, what is wrong with so and so? Like they would say, what is wrong if I go to a party and I don't dance? What is wrong if I wear jewelry? What is wrong if I wear makeup? People would ask questions like this. What is wrong if I watch some sport on the Sabbath? Think questions like this people would ask. And even then, as a young Christian, it struck me that this is a wrong question. Because when somebody says, what is wrong with this? In my mind, you are trying to push the button, you are trying to push the needle as far as you can towards wrong, and trying to avoid stepping over the edge. If you really love the Lord, your question should be, what can I do to please you? How far can I go to please you? I would rather overdo things in trying to please the Lord than overdo things in trying to step on the edges of the Lord's will. If you see what I mean. The question of the Christian is, what can I do to please you? Not, how far can I go before I displease you? So, this is what Paul is saying. He says, why should we go in that direction? Are we trying to provoke the Lord to jealousy? Do we think that our opinion and our strength is greater than His? In other words, if there's any question at all, don't even think about it. Be strong in the direction towards the Lord. Don't drift in the direction where you might be going outside of His will. And that is where he makes a statement that really means a lot to me. Paul says, all things are lawful for me. And I think we look at this statement because he said it he said it in a previous chapter. And we did comment on it. All things are lawful. The law is no longer my schoolmaster. The law is no longer my governor. The law cannot tell me do this or don't do this. All things are lawful. I am free to do whatever I please. But all things are not expedient. I'm still a Christian. I'm still a child of God. The law does not bind me, but I have a conscience. I have a commitment to God. I have the Spirit of Christ in me. I have loyalty to the Lord. And that is a greater motivator, a greater controlling element than even the law. I don't need the law. But it's because I have something greater controlling me. All things are lawful, but all things are not expedient. Not all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. It's not everything that is constructive. It's not everything that is helpful. So even though I'm free, I'm not allowing my freedom to cause me to do things that are not helpful, that are not a blessing to others. And so he says, let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. And this word wealth is a supplied word. He really means you're good. Let no man seek his own. If you take this to an extreme, you could say that Paul is saying, don't seek any good for yourself. I don't think that's what he's saying. He's really saying that as you go through life, don't ask yourself what you want, but ask yourself what will help somebody else. In other words, when you come into a situation where you're caught between, should I please me or should I please the other person? Should I bless me? Should I do what I want to do or should I seek the blessing of somebody else? Then he says, seek the good of the other person. And of course, because we are Christians, we are provided for, we are taken care of. We don't need to worry about ourselves. Somebody has dealt with that already. So you can spend your energy thinking about how you can bless others. You can live your life thinking about how you can reach out and expand yourself and sacrifice yourself for the benefit of others, because somebody has done that for you. So you are not a problem anymore. So that's what Paul is saying. If you are going to because you have the right to eat food, you are going to make your brother stumble. You say, I can eat this because I know there's nothing in it. But while you are eating it, because your brother's conscience is weak, he thinks, okay, so it's okay to worship devils. You destroy your brother because of it. So he comes back and he says, whatsoever is sold in the shambles, that's in the market, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake. All right? So it's not a bother to you. You go and you buy food and you don't ask, was this offered to idols? Did you put it on the grave? Did you put it on the whatever? No. Because that's nothing to you. If they even put it inside the idol overnight, it's nothing to you. It can't harm you. So anything that is sold, don't ask any question for conscience sake. And he says, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. God is the one who rules on this planet. And nobody else can do anything to harm you in a spiritual sense. So don't be afraid of that. That doesn't matter to you. He even says, if any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and you be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no question for conscience sake. Say thank you, say your prayer, and sit down and start eating. But if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience's sake. For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Now when Paul says, for conscience's sake, he says, do not eat it for his sake that showed you, and for conscience's sake. He says, conscience, I say, not your own, because your conscience is free, but of the other. So you have to think about the other man's conscience. And this reminds me of something that happened to me. Not exactly the same. It wasn't a matter of spiritual. It wasn't a spiritual issue. But I remember I was at a meeting in Tennessee, and it was a mix of people who were there. There were a lot of Adventists, and there were also some people from the Mennonite faith who came to the meetings. And at the end, they had a potluck. And I've been to this meeting year after year, and I had no idea that anything was changed. So I went and I gathered up some food, and I picked up something that looked like a piece of linkage, vegetarian sausage, and I was eating it, and I thought this thing tastes strange, but I didn't think anything of it because I'm not really a food a gourmand, I think they call it, or whatever, a connoisseur. I'm not that. I just eat, and I eat whatever is before me, whether I like it or not. And I was halfway through this sausage when Howard came to me and he said, in the presence of a few other people, Vid, that's pork. And I understood why the thing tasted so strange and why I found it distasteful. I was trying my best to finish it because I don't like to take things and then throw it away. But when he said that, immediately I stopped eating. Now the truth is that, and a few of the people had a smile. I smiled myself. But the truth is that I had eaten half of it already. It wouldn't have killed me to eat the other half. Apart from the fact that I didn't like it and I was glad to not have to finish it. But at the same time, for the sake of the people who said it to me, they believe that there's something wrong with it. I believe so too. I mean, in my understanding, it's a health issue. But there might have been people there who think that it is a spiritual issue. It's a matter of religion not to eat this. And so, rather than getting into an argument, it was convenient for me, even if it was something that I liked, which it wasn't. But if it was, it would still have been prudent for me to just stop right there and not eat anymore. Not for my conscience's sake, because I don't think there's no food that can defile you in a spiritual sense. But for the sake of other people who think, as a Christian, you shouldn't eat this, for their sakes, I would have stopped. And that is what Paul is saying. He says that you must consider another person who may be weaker than you in understanding. You can't get into an argument with everybody. You can't get into the depth of doctrine and theology every time you encounter somebody. So sometimes you just have to bend your own principles for the other person's conscience's sake. And Paul says, why is my liberty judged by another man's conscience? In other words, he's saying, why should I give up my freedom because of another man's limitations? For if I by grace be a partaker, because of grace I understand that I can eat this food. Why am I evil spoken of for that which I give thanks? Why do other people think negatively of me if I give thanks and I eat this food? Why should I care that other people are thinking negatively of my behavior? But then he goes on to say, whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. What he really means is not to say that, it's interesting because sometimes we use this verse and we use it to suggest that you must be very careful about what you eat to make sure that this food is for your health and this food is not harmful to your body and so on. And I believe in a secondary sense that is true too. But in the primary context, what Paul is saying, anything that you eat, make sure that you don't offend your brother. That's what he means primarily. You do it for the glory of God in the sense that I'm not thinking about what I want or what pleases me. I'm thinking about my brother's conscience. This is what he means primarily in this statement. And it's clear as you read the other two verses because he says, give none offense, neither to the Jews, nor to the Gentiles, nor to the church of God. So he's saying, and he's talking about eating. When you eat, make sure that nobody has anything to say about your lack of commitment to God. Make sure that the way you eat, people who are weaker. When he says weaker, he means spiritually weaker in understanding. Your conscience is clear because you know this is nothing, but their conscience is weak because they don't understand that. Their understanding of God and of our obligations as Christians is limited. You bend to their limitations. He says, even as I please all men in all things, not seeking my own benefit. He says profit, but he means benefit. I don't know why they use the word profit. It sounds like it's money. I'm not seeking my own benefit, but the benefit of many that they may be saved. And he already explained how he did this in chapter 9. He says, to the Jews I became as a Jew. To the Gentiles, to those outside of the law, I became as one outside of the law. Somebody might say he was like a chameleon, like a lizard changing his skin. He goes among the Jews, he dresses and behaves like the Jews. He goes among the Gentiles, he dresses and behaves like the Gentiles. It's not hypocrisy. It's prudence. He wants to behave in a way that he can find a way to save people. And so he's doing his best not to offend them. And this applies to the way he dresses, to the customs he practices, and even to the food that he eats. This is because the way you dress and the food you eat are not salvational issues. So if I want to change my clothes to suit another person, it's not a matter of salvation. And if I want to change my diet for the sake of a weak brother, that's okay because diet is not a matter of salvation. But where I will not bend is on spiritual principles. On the spiritual principles of salvation, I will not bend. That person must bend to the truth. I will not compromise on this. And so this is the way Paul looked at this issue. And I believe that it is prudent that we also should relate to this issue in a similar way. So that's where we end today. That brings us to the end of the chapter, and just in time because we have about 5 minutes left in which I can greet you, brothers and sisters. And I trust that, as we have been going through this book, what I can see is practical challenges in the Christian life, practical challenges, and Paul is giving us some practical guidelines as to how we can deal with these challenges. And so I hope we are able to take these and apply them to ourselves and our own experience. So I just want to say that I appreciate you being here, Brother Wayne. all the way from England, Sister Zadie from Miami, Brother Ralph from Germany, Sister Anita from England as well, Brother Oliver from Ghana, Brother Mike from Rwanda, Brother Mike from Trinidad, Brother Patrick from St. Lucia, Brother Florian from Germany, Sister Beth from New Zealand, Sister Angela from up there in the US, I think in Washington. Can't quite remember all the time whether it's Canada or Washington. I think it's Washington. Brother Kip from Africa. God bless you too, Brother Kip. Sister Vanya from up there in Croatia. From Montenegro. Sorry, Sister Vanya, from Montenegro. Brother Michael from Germany. Hello, Brother Mike. Brother Colin up there in the US. Sister Diane also. Sister Merle from Trinidad. Sister Arthur from down there in Texas. Good to have you this evening, Dario, from up there in DC. Sister Sharon from Miami. Sister Marcia from up there in New York. Saludos to you, to Sister Marcia. Brother Alexander from up there in Montenegro or Croatia, one of them. Brother Flavius from Spain. Blessings there in Madrid, Brother Flavius. Sister Natalie there in the US, still in Texas. Sister Valerie from England. Sister Loy from right here in Manchester, Jamaica. Good to have you, Sister Loy. Brother Leonard from, I know it's Africa, but I'm not sure if you are in the United States. I can't remember Brother Leonard, but good to have you. Sister Christina from Washington. Sister Donna. Sister Tina from the US there. Thrift stores, all right. That was it. The little store where I got the little tie. That was it. Thrift stores, yes. All right, thank you guys. And Sister Kathleen from Guam. Thank you all for being with me this afternoon, and I know there are a few who didn't sign in this evening. It was a blessing to have you. Thank you all. Let us just close off with prayer before we go. Father, we know that in everything your word has counsel, has lessons that we can learn. I want to thank you especially for the reminder this afternoon that there's nothing that we can encounter that you have not provided for. You have made provision that no temptation can overcome us, but we can conquer all in your strength, in Jesus' name. We thank you. I ask you to bless my brothers and sisters and keep us in your love as we separate from one another. May our hearts be knit together in your love and love for one another. Till we meet again next week. In Jesus' name. Amen. All right, beloved. God bless you. Have a great afternoon. I'll see most of you tomorrow night. And the others I'll see next week.